Hello! Welcome to another episode of DNA Hardwired, common sense turned upside down. My name is Pop, and with me are my co-hosts, Nikki and Tammy. We're very excited to share with you our thoughts, opinions, beliefs, and yes, facts on everyday topics that make us question people's common sense. Hopefully you have listened to episode 1, part 1 of this podcast in order to have a solid understanding of what this podcast is about and how to get the full benefit of this podcast. If you haven't, I strongly recommend and suggest you listen to episode 1, Common Sense Part 1, before listening to this or any of the other episodes. We would like to make it clear at this time that this is not a therapeutic podcast in the typical sense of medical or mental therapy. The information and discussions we are providing can be therapeutic in nature, but are for situational and problem-solving situations. If you believe your situation or problem is serious, we strongly encourage and recommend you seek medical or psychological help. Would you like to add anything, Nikki?
I'm good.
What about you, Tammy?
Me too.
All right. All right, then. Thank you again for joining us, and let's get started. This is episode 2, part 4 of relationships. I must tell you, when we first started this segment on relationships, we were only going to do dating and marital. But as we got more into it, we decided to cover online dating and living together. And then we thought, hey, we better talk about divorce. So that's what we're going to cover during this segment. And I'll be darned. As we're talking, we realized that there's another segment that we're going to do. And the basis of it is going to be dealing with some of Kevin Samuel's thoughts on relationships, dating, marriage, and that sort of thing. We'll get a little bit more into that during our next episode. But this episode is going to be dealing with divorce. And
An interesting, I don't know how interesting the statistic is. It might be a surprise to some and to some maybe not. But approximately 70% of divorces are initiated by the lady. The woman.
What was that
in the
again?
marriage.
I didn't hear that.
70, approximately. Don't quote me, but approximately 70%.
70% of the divorces are initiated by the woman?
Yeah. So
See, we just can't make you women happy.
you just can't do
Statistically,
it.
I mean, there it is, right there. We don't need to go any further.
No, can't
but go
make us
ahead.
happy. So let's get in to see some of the reasons why, perhaps, women tend to initiate divorce over.
Women just aren't happy.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
That's what Kevin Samuel said. They just aren't happy. You can't make them happy.
That's a whole different podcast. That's a whole different conversation.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That's right.
Well, Nikki, I'll tell you some, because I think that while women might initiate the divorce, I don't necessarily think they are the primary cause for the divorce.
Thank you, Tammy.
But I
You
think
said women were the primary.
I said we are the primary to initiate it, but
Okay.
not necessarily the one to cause it. So I
Okay.
think that statistic it has more context to it than I think we want to admit. But there is some element to the making us happy. But I think the biggest challenge that I think or reason that people consider divorce, while there's a lot of them, I think a lot of them center around communication. And it's, we might have disagreements, we might have commitment issues, we have all these other things. But if you really think about it, it's communication. How are we communicating effectively our needs, our wants, our desires? And if we aren't communicating effectively, then one or both of us is going to feel emotionally disconnected. And I think that then leads to some of these other things we're going to talk about, and we don't have the ability to resolve conflicts, be constructive, do things that we need to do, and we start to engage in destructive patterns or other things. But I think it all centers around that inability to communicate effectively.
Well, I'm just going to interject real quick, if you don't mind. I think I mean, I think Pop was just, kind of in jest, kind of just joking, kind of being jovial or what have you. But when he said, "Hey, you just can't make women happy," sometimes that's a communication thing, right? And I think in society there is this thought that, oh, you can't make a woman happy, right? And that's communication, right? That is a part of communication and how we see or how we view each other. So if you go into something thinking, "Hey, I can't make this person happy no matter what I say," right? No matter what I say or what I do, then therein lies the problem. Communication. There's nothing I can say. You're always right, I'm always wrong, right? And so if you have that dynamic already established, Pop, it's interesting you've been married for over 30-something years. That's interesting, but I digress again. That's something to say though, right? That speaks to something.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you too that communication is the key. Whatever issues we may be having, whether it's finances or sexual or the kids, whatever it is, if we should be able to communicate and work our way through it.
No, I agree. And I think just going through that, if we can't do that, that emotional disconnection, like we hear studies that say half of recently divorced respondents say that there's a lack of love or intimacy, and they've grown apart or lost romantic feelings. In essence, they've fallen out of love. I think if you don't communicate your needs and everything effectively, you do get emotionally disconnected. And sometimes it feels like you've fallen out of love when you really just become disconnected and you don't have the emotional ability or the ability to communicate to find that again. So I think, that's another statistic. I think that idea of that there's no intimacy, again, I think those things become iterative and they're tiered on each other. I will say that idea, which I've heard that statistics about, there's little to no intimacy. I think it's interesting that if a woman is initiating a divorce and that's one of the reasons, because there's no intimacy in the bedroom, you have to ask yourself what's causing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with everybody going through a spell. If you married and Pop and you've been married 37 years, I was married 20, you're going to have cycles and stages. But a lack of physical affection or intimacy is a problem. It's a disconnect. That's probably, to me, one of the biggest manifestations of the disconnect. Yeah. If y'all not doing that, there's no way for you to reconnect, build your bond, and at some point, no matter how in love you are, how much you love a person, that's going to create a strain.
Definitely.
Yeah. And this falling out of love thing and lack of intimacy, I've had this thought for a while, and you guys can comment on this. With young women, I think one of the things that we as parents tell our young women is that along the lines of sexual intimacy, you shouldn't be having sex with just anybody. You shouldn't be having sex with anyone unless you love them. You're in love with them. I think women, that message is constantly passed on to them. And so I think what happens is, when you become an adult, that message has been ingrained in you. And I think, now this is just me talking, but I think what happens is in your marriage sometimes, when your male spouse, when he wants to have sex, and if he's done something to upset you, and so now you're really not feeling that love right now, so since you're not feeling that love, that feeling is not going to translate to sexual intimacy. And I think that's what happens to in a lot of situations.
Well, and I think that you hit on something there, Pop. I think not just that we're taught that you have to be in love, and this might be controversial to some people, but it's my opinion. I think for women, sex is emotional. For men, it's physical.
Yes, I would agree with that.
You are feeling emotionally neglected. Right. Or emotionally unvalued. Right. It's going to be real hard for you to have the physiological or the physical desire to have sex because it's very much triggered by your emotions.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I agree with you, Tammy. I think if you are not emotionally either feeling safe or emotionally in that space, then that is going to definitely translate to, not really wanting to be intimate, right? Which further
Right.
disconnects the relationship, because I think in a marriage, being intimate with your partner is key. I think it's, people don't have to, believe in the Bible, but even biblically, it states that you're not supposed to be apart in that type of way for a long time unless you're in prayer or something like that and you both agree. So I think, just from a very practical sense, if you are not bonding with each other on an intimate level, then that's definitely going to start even breaking down the relationship that much, more.
And I think that's another part. Like when you hear things about people saying it's not a partnership anymore, where they feel like, I've heard women say, and I've felt it myself before, where you're like, I'm working, I'm coming in, I'm doing the dishes, I'm cleaning, I'm taking care of the kids. And then we go to bed and you're like, I want to do, you look at them like, I'm tired. Like, are you crazy? Like you came home and sat on the couch and watched TV. Make this equal.
I'm ready. I'm not tired.
Right. Like I got lots of energy and I'm like, no, thank you. But I think that idea of, if we're not partners and we're not, and we don't discuss that and we don't communicate that, I'm just going to say, I got a headache. And he's going to be over there going, really? What's really going on? Why are we not together? And then it just builds from there. And I think that as we grow in relationships, that idea of partnership changes, right? Our priorities change. And we may not have the same kind of priorities that our partner has. And I can say that, like, if you've got kids and household and all those things and a job, sometimes your priorities become the kids, or your priorities become your retirement and 401k, not your partner. And so then you find yourself falling out of alignment, and the things that you had in common 20, 30 years ago, you don't. So you haven't grown together and kept that partnership and that communication at the center or the core of the relationship. And so then you both are disconnected on some level, and then you can lead to loneliness, which can lead to other things, which we'll talk about too. But it's that disconnect and loneliness can fuel a lot of other issues in a marriage.
I agree. I do agree. If you are doing, either partner is doing the bulk of the quote unquote heavy lifting and work, that can definitely cause, a problem. And I think we discussed before how a partnership or, a marriage, it's not 50-50. It's each one of you guys giving 100%. And so if you go into it like that, like, hey, we're supposed to be giving 100%, and that person isn't doing that, then you're more likely to feel like this is not a partnership, right? So I agree.
Right. And I think when you hear people say, well, it wasn't a partnership, and one partner feels they're not getting emotional support and you don't have communication, then you hear that, well, the wife became nagging and the husband didn't want to be around for that. And then they were fighting, and then he went out with his friends, and then one thing led to another, and he's having an affair or she's having an affair because they haven't had these conversations. So you hear these reasons like lack of emotional support or cheating, but I truly believe they all center from some kind of communication challenge that customers have.
I agree.
Or customers, but people.
I knew what you meant, right.
Yeah. But I think that the cheating one is one of those that we don't like to talk about. And another one of those things, it's a reason for divorce. But I think cheating is probably one of the biggest reasons I think people divorce. And I think the biggest reason that it is a catalyst for divorce is, regardless of what leads to it, it's a real difficult thing to come back from, because and again, women we talk, we need to understand stuff. So if you cheat, we're going to ask a lot of questions like, why? What was it about her? What happened? When did it happen? When was it going on? And we want to know everything there is to know about it. And at some point, it's not effective or even realistic for us to move past it, because we can't trust at that point. And if Nikki, you mentioned psychological safety. If you don't feel psychologically safe, or you don't feel emotionally safe, or you don't feel like you can trust your partner, you ain't going to communicate with them. You're not going to have a partnership. You definitely not going to be intimate with them. And love is the last thing on your mind about what you think about them at that point.
No, I mean, I do agree with that, and I think we've had this discussion. I don't know if it was in one of our episodes. I thought we did, but maybe we didn't. But I do see, and people could argue, and supposed to be, common sense. But in my mind, I see this as common sense, but some others may not. But I do believe there is a difference between a person cheating and a person who is a cheater. And what I mean by that, I think we all could have put ourselves in a situation, right? Not even thinking, anything of it, like unintentionally putting yourself in this situation and you're like, oh my God, what happened? Now, don't get me wrong. I still think even if you're in a interesting situation, you still at the end of the day have a choice to cheat. I do believe it's a choice, and I'm definitely not making excuses, but I do believe there's a difference between someone cheating on you and a person literally being a cheater. I think some people are serial cheaters, where some people, it literally was a one-off. They changed their behavior. They're very, sorry about it. And I think it's different if a person cheats and moving on versus knowing you're with someone that is a cheater. Because if you're with someone who is a cheater, they are going to cheat eventually. And it's just a matter of the frequency, how they do it, those different types of things, instead of someone actually putting themselves in a position, right, that they shouldn't have, but and then they cheated. To me, it's almost like someone that has stole versus someone who is a thief, right? I think maybe a person had stolen in their life because they needed, milk for their child or baby formula for their child. And again, I'm not condoning this behavior. I'm just saying sometimes we're in a situation where we feel forced to do something that we normally would not do. Again, not justifying cheating, not justifying stealing. But I think sometimes, we find ourselves in positions and we do things that we normally wouldn't. But if a person is a cheater, then they're going to cheat. If a person is a thief, they're going to steal. And so then you have to ask yourself, am I willing to be with this woman or man that is a cheater, right? And I think that is a question that we have to address as far as divorce, right? Making the decision to divorce or not. Am I with a cheater, or am I with someone who literally made a human mistake? They're very sorrowful for it, that they're willing to go to counseling, and that this was a one-off for whatever reason. Maybe because there was a lack of intimacy, maybe because they didn't feel a partnership anymore, and so I think we need to truly address that as well.
Well, I think you bring up a good point with that. And I think, one of the other things we hear is that one or the other person wasn't ready for marriage. That means a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that a person wasn't ready for marriage. It may also mean that you weren't ready to get married to each other because you didn't really know who each other was. That's true. So when you realize that to your point, you have differing values than the other person or baggage, or you realize who they are. Because the way we respond to things, and like we talk about these issues like communication, falling out of love, not having intimacy, not having partnerships, those are in some cases stressors. And how people respond to that is sometimes, I won't say it's in their DNA, but it's who they are. And so if I don't know who my partner is, and to your point, if I don't know my partner has stolen, then I can't decide if they're a thief or there was a one-time situation. If I don't know how they respond to stress, then I don't know what they're going to be. And if you aren't finding out who your partner really is, and you're not getting to know them and communicating with them, you probably aren't ready to marry them because you don't realize the differing values or responses that you have. And you can't really truly trust a person if you don't really know that person. And so that's why you hear people saying, well, I never thought he would do that. And people around them are going, I did. I could have told you that. I knew that after 5 minutes. Right?
That's so
but
true.
We're like, I didn't know. I don't know how girls like, come on. so
so
you
true.
don't know them. And so then it becomes oh my gosh, we're on this road to divorce because we didn't really know each other. So we probably shouldn't have got married.
Right.
And, and I will say for my thing, I got married in a year of knowing my husband. We lasted 20 years. But did I really know who he was? Probably not. And as I learned that over time, realized we were fundamentally different. I had friends say to me, y'all are fundamentally different. But at that point, I'm like, but we love each other. Opposites attract. Everything's going to be great. Right? And how I respond to trauma and new information and how he responded to trauma and new information, those are things that were very different for us, right? And so I think that those are all things that people need to think about. And there's some of the reasons why people do go to divorce is because they weren't really ready, because they didn't really know who the person was. And to your point, Nikki, when the cheating happens, they can't get past it because they didn't know. It's like, but if you knew who he was, you were going to know the difference between a cheater. Because I'm like, okay, you cheated because that was your response to this, because that's what you do. Now, either I have to accept that or not. And if my response is I can't accept it, it's not that you cheated. It's that we weren't ready for marriage and we went into it and made some big mistakes because we didn't really know who each other were.
And I do think that you're right. I think that you're right, because some people think not ready for marriage means, well, you're too young or you're not financially stable or different things like that.
Right.
But really, you could be a billionaire, you could be 40 years old, and so technically when you look for ready for marriage, people will be like, oh, well, you're a billionaire and you're 40, you should be ready for marriage, right? But it's deeper than just age, maturity, money. It's literally, are you ready for this marriage? Are you ready for what this person's going to be and what I'm going to be? Are we ready for that? Do I know you well enough to be ready for this marriage?
Do I fully understand what marriage is supposed to be about?
Right.
And am I willing to accept that?
And
do I fully know who I am? Because if you don't know who you are, you don't know how you're going to be in a marriage. Because you may not. I heard my grandparents say some people ain't meant to be married. That's not, because that's not who you are.
And I do agree with that. And I think part of knowing who a person is do they have addictions, right? Or, and kind of, what that.
They beat your ass. Those are things you should know.
These are know. Right. And because that's definitely going to, and
I also think that when you hit on this addiction thing, you need to understand what that addiction is and what's involved with that addiction. And, I've got some experience dealing with folks in addiction. I used to be in a career dealing with folks with addiction. And so one of the things I think that's really important for you to understand about addictions is people who are generally people who have these type of, especially drug addictions, they're not always honest. They're not always honest, they may say that they have a history of addiction and that they're over it, and that could be true, but it might not be true. So you really need to, that's an area that you really, really need to give a lot of thought to determine whether or not you, as you were saying, about whether or not you're ready to marry this person. And it could be smoking, and it could be a lot of other types of addictions, but you really need to have a clear understanding of what that's all about.
Because I think sometimes when we think about addictions, we think about illicit drugs, and it's like, no, this person can literally be an alcoholic, right?
Or have gambling problems.
Or
smoking.
Pornography. I mean, all these various things, right? And so I think those are things that definitely need to be taken into consideration.
Speaking of cheating, sexual addictions.
Sexual addictions, that's right. Sexual addictions, right? So maybe they can,
And I think while these are some of the reasons, like addiction is, I think, one of in the top 10 of reasons people divorce, I don't think that more, and I would have to look at the statistics on it, but I don't think that these are new things. I think oftentimes, to your point, Nikki, you might marry a person knowing they drink. You just don't know how much they drink.
Right. That's right.
Or knowing that they watch porn, but you don't know how much they do.
Right.
So you see these flags, you look at them as yellow or green when they really are red. And then you again go back to the I'm shocked at that.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think too with cheating and addiction, I think domestic abuse can kind of be intertwined, right? Because
Yes.
most people are going to confront their spouse if they are cheating,
Right.
right? And so if you have this person that, I don't know, they're an alcoholic or they're addicted to certain types of things, right? It may bring out something, you know how they say an
How
angry
they
drunk,
respond.
right? How
Yeah.
they respond, an angry drunk, right? So here they are on a bender, here you are in their face about cheating, and the next thing you know, he or she has done something abusive, right? Physically. I mean, and sometimes people think of domestic violence as just this person assaulted me, but domestic violence can be this person took an object and threw it close to my face, missed on purpose, but broke a wall or a window. So I think sometimes people think that domestic violence is always physical, but it can be emotional manipulation as well, right? That's a form, like, I'm not going to pay the mortgage this month, you figure it out. I'm going to
Right.
go stay with
Right.
my mom, and or I'm not going to pay your cell phone bill. So I think sometimes people, it leaves them powerless if a person is either being overwhelmed by physical abuse or emotional abuse. It can leave them feeling powerless, right? So now you're with this person who is being abusive, emotionally or physically harming you, and then you're in this position of, okay, what do I do with this, right? And again, is this a one-off? Again, I'm not justifying this, or is this person abusive, right? These are things that definitely have to be explored.
And in the
I
case,
agree.
and in the case of domestic, I mean, all of the abuse is something we need to be concerned with.
Yes.
But in the case of domestic abuse, especially in the case of physical domestic abuse, usually there's no one-offs.
Right.
And especially like in the case of males, and usually that's the perpetrator. If he hits you once, be prepared. Be prepared.
And you're right on that, Pop. I think that, one of the statistics I saw, that about a quarter of respondents said that domestic violence is what led to their divorce.
Right. That's a huge number.
It is. I think it's key to note, too, that domestic abuse is not a relationship issue. Even if it causes divorce, that's something wrong with your partner.
Right.
I
That's
think
true.
that's not a relationship issue we can fix. If, to me, a relationship issue has either a fixable component to it, or
Right.
you can adjust, whatever that is. Domestic violence is different.
Right.
I think there's something within that person and how they respond to things and I think that's one thing that people try to say, well, I can fix it or I can change him. No, you can't.
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I think if you have like a lack of emotional support, then the breakdown in communication, right, can, lead to people feeling like despair, right? So emotional support oftentimes comes from trying to reach out to that person and, try to communicate with them, right? And trying to get something from them on an emotional level. So if you lack emotional support, that's kind of rough.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be around that, right? If you're being disrespected and people aren't taking their marriage as a priority, then you probably gonna feel hurt, betrayed. Why did I do this? Was I ready, was I ready for this marriage? And kind of like what that looks like. And, once empathy and compassion is gone in a relationship, it's very hard to come back for that, because you're going to say and do things that you normally, under normal, happy, joyful situation, wouldn't do. But once once the empathy and the compassion is gone, it's very hard to come back from that.
well, and I think that leads to one of the, top 10 reasons that people are done, that they get a divorce. They're done. You've been through all of this. You've went through all of these kind of moments. You've gotten the lack of emotional support. We've talked about addiction, cheating, not being ready, not having that partnership, not having intimacy. At some point, you say, you know what? I'm done. I've put in everything I know how to put in. I've tried to save this. I've tried to work it out. You know, as my grandmother would say, you realize this dog just don't hunt. Like, it's not, and you're done. Like, because you have to save yourself at that point and say, I don't want to wake up and lose who I am. And I think we hear women say a lot of times, it's little things. There was no one thing. Like, he changed the toilet paper the wrong way. And I was he flipped on the light the wrong way, and I was done, because it's a buildup of things, and you realize that you put work and effort into something that isn't going to fulfill who you are. And so I think that's an important thing. And when you're done, R. Kelly said, when a woman's fed up, it ain't nothing you can talk about. It's too late.
That's facts.
Ain't that the truth? I know as a male, in my experience dealing with relationships personally and observing other folks, that's one thing that I've noticed is that when the woman says she's done, I mean, if she's truly done, she's done. We men, we can go back and forth because we're not looking at it necessarily from an emotional standpoint. We're looking at it from a logical standpoint, you know. And so many times when it looks like the marriage is failing, we look at it from a logical standpoint and say, logically, this is all we need to do, you know, to make this thing work. Whereas I think with women, I'm not a woman, I'm only an outside observer, but what I've observed with them, and you guys have spoken on this about, you know, how you guys tend to approach things from a more of a emotional standpoint. When it's over, emotionally, when it's over, it's a done deal.
We ain't going back, Pop. We ain't going back. We're done.
Not going back.
Not going back. And I think sometimes why people may feel like we started out with the statistics in the beginning, the 70% of women, give or take, filing being the ones that initiate divorce. I think that sometimes people's partners may feel like, where did this come from? Like, this is out of the blue. Right. And I think it's unfair. I think that if your partner feels like this divorce has coming out of left field, and you as the woman, you are done, it's a little bit unfair. I mean, I have to admit, it is unfair to allow yourself to get to the point to where you are done and you are the one that's like, I'm out, I'm not coming back. I have to say that I do believe that is unfair. So I'm not saying it is a good thing. I'm so sorry.
I disagree. I don't necessarily think it's unfair. I think women are word focused, men are action focused. And so I do think on some level we condition them. But if I'm constantly telling you, you stepping on my toe, and I'm constantly saying, ow, and you are doing nothing, and then I move my foot, is that really unfair? If I've been constantly telling you? Now,
I do think it's a little unfair. And the reason why I say it is because communication. Because I think, and this is a very broad stroke brush. I'm not saying all women or all men or all, that's not what I'm saying. So this is very broad. But I do believe because our communication styles may be a little bit different from our partners, right? I think what happens is that men tend to normally logically think. And yes, you are telling your spouse that, hey, you are stepping on my foot. It hurts, right? I think that if in your mind you're like, I'm heading towards being done, I think we really should have a serious conversation with our spouse to let them know, you have stepped on my toe to the point you may not know this, but I have a fractured toe. I just didn't tell you. So I can't, if you step on my toe again, they may have to amputate it. I'm just being, hyperbolic, but I'm just stating, right? And I'm not willing to lose this toe, right? I think, though, we have an obligation to the marriage to at least let this person know that this is where I am. I'm at the point of I understand that I kept telling you, yes, you probably should have stopped stepping on my toe. That, yes, if you love me, this and that, I get that. I just think sometimes we communicate different, and when we're done, we're done. And what I'm saying is, instead of getting done, allow that person the opportunity to really understand where you are. And then if they step on your toe again, knowing that your toe can get amputated, then that's different. But I think oftentimes in our communication skills, we don't allow the person the opportunity to understand, I'm almost done. If you step on my toe one more time, I'm out. And I think that's unfair. And I think oftentimes we do that. And it is unfair to that person because they're like, wait a minute, I know I've been stepping on your toe. Sorry. Go ahead, Pop. Go ahead.
I agree with you both.
Okay.
I think that the difference in what you're both saying, I think you're both saying the same thing. But I just think that one of you are saying it should stop at this point, and Nikki, I think you're saying I'm willing to tolerate it a little bit longer, and Tammy is saying, look, you stepped on my toe one time, which was one time too many, and I'm communicating that to you. Now, if you continue to step on my toe to the point of where now we're talking about possible amputation, that's not me. Nikki, you're saying that maybe you might be willing to do that. So
what
I think
I'm saying,
both of
though,
you
is
guys,
you have to communicate to that person. If you step on my toe one more time, it's going to be, I'm going to amputate it. And
I understand.
Right. And I think, do you understand? Because,
I understand.
And I
That's
think
all
you
I'm
should
saying. All I'm
convey
saying is
that to that person.
All I'm saying is Tammy is saying you can step on my toe one time. I'll let you know. And you're saying I might be willing to let you step on my toe twice. What was that, Tammy?
Yeah, I give you 2 times.
Yeah, I'll give you 2 times. So you got, to me, it sound like you guys are saying the same thing, and which is, again, it's about communication.
It's about
and it's
communication.
also about differences in people and relationships and knowing who your partner is.
Because I think in a divorce, either the man presented to the woman, or the woman presented to the man, or if it's same-sex marriage, whatever, however it goes down, whoever is the one that's presenting or talking about the topic of divorce, if the other person is surprised, then I think that's a failure in communication. And I don't think it's
not necessarily.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily.
Okay.
Because I'll share a personal note with you.
Okay.
My first wife, hopefully she won't listen to this podcast, but anyway, I'm just going to tell you what happened.
Okay.
And with my first wife, I feel that I was telling her for years how I felt.
Okay.
And the issues that I was having in our relationship.
Okay.
And for me personally, it appeared to me that either she wasn't listening or it didn't matter.
Okay.
And so at that point, I felt that I needed to make a decision for me. So again, I think communication is the key. But part of communication is also understanding that either your message is not getting through or it's getting through and it doesn't matter to that person. And so now you need to make a decision. Are you going to continue with this person stepping on my toe and they don't care? Either they're not getting the message or they just don't care. Or am I going to stop them from stepping on my toe? And that's all I'm saying.
I agree.
But I do agree that you do need to try to communicate the best you can. You just don't,
Right.
But anyway.
Yeah. And I think your point, Pop, is the same, is that when people are done,
yes,
there's a lot of reasons. I don't think anybody wakes up one day and just says, you know what, I don't feel it.
Right.
They wake up. And it's because it's been a series of things.
Right.
And, we've covered just 10 of the reasons people get divorced.
Right.
And generally, it's no one thing.
Right.
It's generally a combination of things.
Right. Over a period of time, usually.
Right. And they might all have the root of communication, but it's all these things. And
right.
It's the degree to which we're willing to do it, as you pointed out with me and Nikki, is different for everybody. And more often than not, it's different within the partners.
Right.
The degree I'm willing to go before I say I'm done was different than the degree my husband was willing to go to before he said he was done.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's the difference. And so I think while women initiate these things, it's all because of degrees.
Right.
It's degrees of what we're willing to accept and we're not.
Right. And because we're all different degrees.
I agree.
Right.
Yeah. Nikki, What do you think? Some possible ways to save a marriage. What are some possible ways to save a marriage? Do you think?
I think some possible ways are to reflect on, you know, how you started out as a couple. I watched Divorce Court, and Star Jones, she always says, well, tell me about the happy times, tell me about, you know, and it is interesting that, you know, that she does that, because I think then where you started and then where you are now, it kind of helps you, like, did you know some of these things? Well, I knew he drank, or I knew she cheated, or I knew she was gonna, then it kind of puts things into perspective, right? To reflect, right? And so I think it's important to kind of know kind of where, you know, where you started.
Right.
And then, I'm sorry?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Okay. And then, you know, how do we think we got here, right? So I think starting at the beginning, right? And then you got the middle, and now we're here, right? So starting at the beginning.
Map it out.
Right. Yeah. Map things out, Write it down. Map, you know, kind of, you know, map things out, right? And so I think that that's a good way, you know, and even like, hey, what attracted me to, you know, my partner in the beginning, those different types of things. And then I think it's important to turn inward, right? Look at yourself. Your partner does not have to, to complete you, nor them, right? Like, so your partner doesn't have to complete you, and you don't have to complete them, right?
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, I think that coming into a marriage, we're taking two individuals and then we're making them one.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we are two individuals. It's just like if you make cake. You have flour, you have sugar.
Right.
Those are two separate ingredients. Now, when you mix them up, right, they're going to look different. They're going to taste different, right? But at the end of the day, you still have a component of flour in that cake. Right. You still have a component of sugar in that cake. And yes, they are intertwined. And yes, they've made, you know, the cake is great. You need both of them. At the same time, though, the flour is the flour. And the sugar is the sugar. Right. And even though you intertwine your life together, I can't complete you, right? I can't complete you. You can't complete me. So we need to take a deep look into who we are, right? As a individual. And so I think that that's very important to look inward. And then stop making assumptions, right? Stop assuming what you think your partner thinks about this or that. Actually try to communicate. What do you mean about, like, what are you saying? What are you trying to convey?
I gotta stop you here.
Oh,
that was
okay.
That was a fault on my part in my first relationship. Is I made a lot of assumptions.
Can't do that.
Yeah, I made a lot of assumptions about why my wife was doing this,
right,
or why she wasn't doing that.
Right. Don't assume.
We talked about communication. I kind of felt that I didn't get the proper responses from her when I was seeking out information.
Right.
So then I just filled it in with what I thought was going on. I just made assumptions.
Which is crazy.
It is.
So don't assume, like, don't ask the person. You guys are married, you know, don't assume, because what happens is you make an assumption and then you act on that assumption.
Well, important point. Now we're talking, you and I are husband and wife.
Okay.
So I'm asking you the question.
Right.
And then you don't give me the response.
That's true.
Or you don't give me what I think is the appropriate response.
Yes. That's true. Sometimes we
lie.
So
what am I left with? Left to make an assumption.
You're left to make an assumption. Yeah.
But that's still
communication is important.
Yes. But that's still not a good idea for me to be making an assumption.
Correct. Take responsibility for your actions, right? And then go from there. But I think part of that, right, is to kind of like set up rules for the relationship. I'm not going to call you out of your name when we get angry. Maybe there's a safe word, right? I don't know, but I think that we need to set up rules for the relationship. There's things that we should be doing, things that we should not be doing. So when you love and respect your partner, there's just certain things that you should and should not be doing. And so I think every relationship is going to look a little bit different as far as what rules you decide to have, right?
Right.
But I think at the base of the rules is love, right? And what love looks like for
Right.
people. Make a weekly date, right? Even with kids and this and that, it could be a home date. It could be like, hey, the kids are in bed, but we have committed that we are, even if we're eating ice cream in the bed and that's our date and we're Netflixing
Right.
at 10 o'clock at night because everything is shut down, continue to do things that you did, when you first fell in love, and part of that was dating. It may look a little bit, different. You're going to definitely want to have, physical touch. Again, it doesn't have to be on a sexual nature, but hugging, kissing, those things keep us connected.
Yes.
Showing appreciation. Hey babe, thanks for doing the dishes. Tammy, I think you had mentioned earlier, if you're doing all the work, and the person's just chilling on the couch and then they want some intimacy time, but they've shown you no appreciation, it's going to be hard for you to
Right.
to do that. So, and then fight fair. Don't
Fight fair.
Easy.
argue fair. When I say fight, here we go, communication. When I say fight, I do not mean physical. So let me say that. So I should maybe use fight for argue, right? Argue,
Right.
disagreement.
Disagreement.
Right?
I like that better. I don't even like that word argue.
Yeah.
Because we shouldn't be arguing.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
so true. So I won't say fight fair. I'll say disagree.
Yes.
Disagree fairly,
Yes.
right? So let's not take stuff from our past, things that we know that are painful, things that are hurtful, and turn that on, on that person. And we need to be honest, but taking in consideration that person's feelings in our honesty. So be honest with your feelings, but be mindful when you convey how you honestly feel about something. That's important.
Right.
What do you think, Tammy?
I agree with everything Nikki has said. I think that you have to go through all of that. I think you also have to kind of plan for the future. If you are already ready to call it quits and you're not thinking about how you see yourself in the future, what that could look like, and you don't have those goals and dreams, sometimes it makes it easier for you to just walk away because you don't see the end state. So it's like you begin with that end in mind kind of thought. You're like, we gonna ride this out till the wheels fall off, but let's figure out what
Right.
the car is stopped right now. Let's fix the flat and keep it moving. Let's, we can keep going.
Right.
And sometimes you don't have that vision of the future. And so you don't do that. I think if you want to really save your marriage and you want to work through it, I think you have to really plan this. You have to, sometimes it might be, you got to take a break. You gotta say, okay, we're going to separate for a minute and we're going to come back together. Or we going to do whatever it takes to try to make sure this works, even if that's a Hail Mary, and say we're going to go to counseling, we're going to go to a retreat, we're going to do something that might seem drastic, but it's what we have to do to get us back on track.
I like
I
that.
think that's important.
I like all that you're stating. The last thing I will say is when there's disagreements. I like everything that you said was, do not call each other out of your name. Try not to yell or scream because that's not going to allow good communication. So definitely not call your partner out of their name. No yelling, no screaming. If you don't feel like you're in a place where you can respond and not be angry, right? Because if you're responding from a place of anger and not love and compassion for your partner, that's going to be a huge problem.
Right.
Agreed.
Okay. Wow. We've covered a lot. We're kind of at the end here. I'm going to cover a few common mistakes that people make during this so-called divorce dance. One of the things I think maybe people do is waiting too long. Now that might sound wrong, but I think that there should come a time in your relationship where you understand that there is a serious enough problem, and you guys have sat down and tried to work it out, and you've talked about it, but you just decide to kind of hang on in there. And I'll have to be honest again, personal note. I feel that that's what I did in my first marriage. Is I I waited a little too long. Not seeking legal advice soon enough. Not separating finances soon enough. So those are just some of the things that I think that you need to think about if you're at that point anyway, where you're contemplating divorce. Just some closing thoughts. What do you guys think? Any closing thoughts on divorce?
The only thing I'd like to say is, again, I think I think that we should do everything that we can to make a divorce. I'm sorry, to make a marriage work.
Make a divorce successful.
No. I'm trying to. Yeah, no. So I think we should do everything that we can do to not get divorced. Like, we should really try.
I would agree with that.
To, within our powers, to not get a divorce. And I think that if we find ourselves in the situation to where it's like this it is what it is, then we need to really make it as painless as we can
for both parties.
For both parties. For the kids.
Yeah.
And you need, I think that, I know sometimes it's hard, but I think if we can find a space for compassion and love, because at one time in the relationship, you love this person, you took a covenant, you took a vow, right? And I think if I know it sounds maybe counterproductive, because you're thinking, well, why are you getting a divorce, right? If you can be so amicable now, what happened, right? But I think in the process of the divorce, if you can still try to know that there was a time that you loved that person, and maybe you still love that person. I think that that's important, is to not make the divorce ugly. The divorce does not have to be ugly. It's already painful and hurtful enough that this person that you have shared your life with, right, for a period of time, and you thought you were going to be with forever, and now you find yourself in a place where that's just not able to take place for various reasons. I think it's important to part in love. I think it's important to part in compassion, and I think it's important to part in respect. And I think that speaks more for you than the partner. So it's not about you're doing this for them. You are doing it for yourself and them, and they're the benefit of that as well. But that's kind of how I see it. What about you, Miss Tammy?
I agree. I think your dad said it right. Or Pop. It's time well wasted is the way I look at it with my situation. I realized that nothing happened without, it all happened for a reason. It didn't end the way that I wanted it to end, but I could try to make it successful. You want to make your marriage successful, and if you can't and it fails, you can make your divorce successful, because how you walk away from it, how you end, and how you show up in it is just as important to me as how you showed up in your marriage.
And I want to second what you had said too. I agree with you totally. Even though I've went through one divorce, there are a lot of positive things in that first divorce. I learned a lot. In that first marriage, I learned a lot. I grew a lot. And truthfully, this might sound crazy, but I don't regret the marriage, and I don't regret the divorce. It was part of my life, and I'm a firm believer that we need to try and work the best we can wherever we are in life to make it to make our lives as best as we can. So I agree with that.
I agree with that as well.
Okay. All right, then. All right. That's going to bring this session to a close, a session on divorce, and kind of brings us somewhat full circle. We started off talking about dating, living together, online dating. We talked about marriage, and now we just talked about divorce. And as I said, probably our next episode, we're going to talk about Kevin Samuel's philosophy about relationships, because I think that's going to tie into probably some areas that we didn't touch on as far as how men and women see relationships. So again, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you'll join us for our future episodes. And this is Pop,
Nikki,
and Tammy.
Signing off, dropping the mic.
Peace out.
Holla.
Think it through, people.